Think about the last time you received a vague text from your boss, or, maybe a message from your partner that simply said, "We need to talk."
Oh, the absolute worst. Just a total stomach drop.
Right. I mean, in a matter of milliseconds, your heart rate spikes, your stomach completely drops, and you're already mentally drafting your resume or preparing for a breakup.
You're in full panic mode before you even know what the meeting is about.
Exactly. And the thing is, you didn't consciously choose to panic in that moment. It's like this invisible script running in the background of your brain just executed that command automatically.
Like a reflex.
Yeah, a reflex. And you probably spent decades letting that invisible code dictate, when you withdraw, when you lash out, or when you just shut down completely. But today, we are giving you the administrator password to rewrite that software.
Which is, it's the ultimate turning point, isn't it? We're moving from simply observing our mental code to actually getting our hands on the keyboard and actively reprogramming how we move through the world.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've been on this journey with us, we are stepping into the final and arguably most actionable stage of our mental self-discovery. It's the letter E in the ABCDE model, exchange.
We finally made it to exchange.
We've made it. So to anchor where we are for you listening, we just finished dissecting dispute, which was all about understanding the root cause of our reactions.
Yeah.
The why.
Right, why we harbor these automatic beliefs in the first place.
Exactly. But understanding the blueprint doesn't actually build the house.
Yeah.
We have to figure out how to step in and replace a destructive reflex with something that actually serves you.
Because the why gives you awareness, but the how gives you freedom. Dispute was really the diagnostic phase. Exchange is the intervention.
I always picture it, and I do this for myself navigating all this too, like a smartphone.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Our automatic beliefs, those deeply ingrained anxieties and, snap reactions, they're like those heavy, unoptimized background apps.
The ones that drain everything.
Right. You don't even see them open on your screen, but your phone is running incredibly hot and your battery is completely dead by 2 p.m. So Exchange is about force closing those corrupted apps and, I guess, installing an update that optimizes your battery life.
I love that visual, actually, because it brings us to this really crucial misconception about what changing your mind entails. Before we can even dig into the specific psychological tools to rewrite that software, we really have to define what a successful update looks like.
Okay, so what does it look like?
Well, it is rarely about deleting your old operating system entirely.
Wait, really? Because if I'm trying to rewrite this code, I'm absolutely looking for the delete key. I want the bad stuff gone. What does a successful update look like if I'm not wiping the hard drive?
So in traditional surface-level cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT people sometimes assume it's just this simple swap. Like you take an unproductive thought, delete it, and force a positive one into its place.
Just paste over it.
Exactly. But from a deeper, more holistic psychological perspective, the real goal of Exchange is integration.
Integration.
Yeah. So let's say your default setting is introversion, right? You process the world internally, you recharge in solitude, and large crowds just completely drain your battery.
Sounds like a lot of people I know.
Right. But then you realize that to advance in your career, you really need to comfortably network or lead big meetings. The goal of Exchange isn't to kill the introvert inside you.
Okay, so you're not trying to become this completely different human being overnight.
Not at all. You are simply adding to your behavioral repertoire. You're integrating a new skill so you actually have a choice.
Ah, a choice.
You honor the introvert when it serves you to be reflective and deep, and then you pull out the extroverted tools when the environment demands it. You just become a more complex, adaptable system.
Okay, real talk here, though. I want to push back on that a bit.
Go for it.
Because adding to your repertoire and achieving this holistic integration, that sounds phenomenal if you have the luxury of sitting in a meditation retreat for a month.
Fair point.
But what if you are listening to this right now and you are suffocating under the weight of burnout, or, you're in the middle of a full-blown anxiety attack in a bathroom stall at work?
Yeah.
In that exact moment, you don't care about holistic integration. You want a radical hack to make the physical pain stop immediately.
Yeah.
Don't you just need an emergency override right then and there?
That is such a vital distinction. And honestly, the short answer is yes. In an acute state of crisis, your goal is not deep psychological integration. Your goal is sheer survival.
Just getting through it.
Exactly. When you are having a panic attack, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, has completely hijacked your nervous system.
It's just blaring the fire alarm.
Blaring it. And when the fire alarm is going off, you don't sit down in the hallway and try to redesign the building's floor plan.
Right, you get out of the building.
You get out. If you are deeply triggered, you pull the emergency pull cord. You step out of the room, you splash cold water on your face, you do deep box breathing to physically lower your heart rate. You do whatever it takes to survive that moment.
Because you can't learn when you're panicking.
True exchange, the deliberate rewiring of those neural pathways. It's biologically impossible when your brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline.
Man, so it's essentially taking the car to the mechanic instead of trying to swap out the tires while you're doing 80 on the freeway.
Exactly. You do it in the garage, you wait until you're calm. You might be sitting on your couch later that evening, maybe holding a cup of tea or a glass of wine, and you look back at the week.
When the dust has settled.
Right, because that is when your prefrontal cortex is back online. That's when you have the executive function to actually say, my battery drained again today. What app was running and how do we rewrite the code so it doesn't happen tomorrow?
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of doing it in the garage. But as I understand it from the deep dive prep we did, we can't just open the laptop and start typing new code immediately.
Yeah.
There's like a prerequisite.
There is. And it's deeply counterintuitive, honestly, because it involves doing absolutely nothing to fix the problem.
Wait, nothing?
Nothing. You cannot rewrite a piece of code if you refuse to look at the monitor. So the very first step of exchange is acknowledging the absolute unvarnished truth of your current state.
So before I try to stop feeling anxious or angry, I just have to sit and stare at the anxiety.
Yes. In dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, this mechanism is called radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance.
Yeah. Let's take the terror of public speaking. Before you even attempt to mitigate the fear, you must radically accept its presence. You internally state, I am terrified right now, my chest is tight, my hands are shaking, and that is simply what is happening in this present moment.
Just calling it out.
You don't fight it, and crucially, you don't judge yourself for feeling it.
Which is, that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Because our default human instinct is just massive resistance. If I feel nervous, my inner monologue immediately starts screaming, stop sweating, calm down, stop looking so nervous.
Well, of course. But we have to look at the biology of why that resistance is actually so destructive. When you fight a feeling, you are sending a secondary signal to your brain that says, hey, this emotion is a threat.
Oh, wow. So I'm just adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. Your brain responds to threats by dumping even more cortisol into your bloodstream. So now you aren't just stressed about the speech, you are stressed about being stressed.
The double arrow.
Right. Radical acceptance acts as a circuit breaker. By saying, I am anxious and that's okay, you signal to your amygdala that there's no secondary threat. The alarm bells actually begin to quiet down.
It turns off the echo. And, there's a concept here that completely hit home for me regarding how we do this. It's the immense power of doing this radical acceptance publicly.
Oh, yes, the public arena.
Think about a brilliant stand-up comedian. They walk out on stage, maybe the energy in the room is super stiff or their first joke just completely bombs and they feel incredibly awkward. The best comedians don't pretend it's going great. Their next line is just a brutal, honest acknowledgement of how hard they are bombing.
They name the elephant in the room.
Right. And the second they do, the audience just erupts in laughter. You can literally feel the tension get sucked out of the theater. The comedian's anxiety drops because they don't have to carry that burden of pretending anymore.
The jig is up. Public radical acceptance completely eliminates the fear of being found out because you can't be exposed if you've already exposed yourself.
So keeping that in mind, I actually want to share a highly relatable scenario, especially if you're a parent listening to this, because I found myself in a situation where I almost used this tool, but I had to pivot hard.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
Okay, picture this. It's a Saturday morning. I am vacuuming the living room, sweating, moving heavy furniture around. And my teenage son is sprawled out on the couch, entirely absorbed in his phone.
Classic.
Barely lifting his legs as I push the vacuum under him, right?
A scene playing out in households across the world.
Exactly. And I felt this intense, blinding irritation bubbling up in my chest. It was totally disproportionate to the moment. But because of the work we've been doing on dispute, I actually paused. I looked at the code.
Okay, good.
And I realized my anger wasn't really about the vacuuming. It was triggering this old, deeply ingrained, obedient child persona from my own youth. Growing up, I was one who always cleaned, always followed the rules, never stepped out of line.
Right, the good kid.
Yeah. And my inner obedient child was colliding head-on with his rebel persona on the couch.
Man, that is a phenomenal moment of psychological clarity. You literally have two completely different archetypes clashing in real time.
Right. So I had this massive aha moment, standing there holding the vacuum. And my immediate instinct was to perform that public radical acceptance. I wanted to turn off the machine, sit him down, and just spill my psychological guts.
Oh, boy.
I wanted to be like, look, my obedient child is fighting your rebel, and this is why I'm projecting my anger onto you. I honestly thought this radical vulnerability would act like the comedian on stage and magically resolve the tension.
But you didn't actually deliver that speech, did you?
I didn't. I caught myself.
Yeah.
My instinct was to completely open up and vent, but I forced myself to do the exact opposite. I swallowed the speech, I shut my mouth, and I just kept vacuuming.
Which is incredible because without even realizing it, you utilize a core behavioral tool right there. It's called flipping it.
Flipping it.
Yeah, it's where you identify your strongest emotional impulse and you deliberately execute the inverse action. And let's unpack why you made the absolute right call as a dad in that specific scenario.
Please validate my choice.
Public vulnerability is a highly potent tool, but it comes with a very strict prerequisite. A safe environment.
And a teenager trying to avoid Saturday morning chores does not constitute a safe environment for psychological vulnerability.
Rarely. If the audience, in this case your son, doesn't possess the emotional maturity or the readiness in that specific moment to handle your vulnerability safely, they won't absorb it. They will weaponize it.
Ouch. Yeah.
If you had delivered that speech, your son's takeaway wouldn't have been deep empathy for your childhood. His takeaway would have been, great, Dad is having a psychological breakthrough. This isn't about me being lazy. This is about his unresolved trauma. Excellent. I don't have to clean the kitchen.
Oh, absolutely. It instantly becomes a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Vulnerability requires readiness on both sides. If the other person isn't ready to receive it, you are simply handing them ammunition to keep you stuck in your old dynamic.
Yeah.
By radically accepting it internally, you short-circuited the anger. You gave yourself the power to choose your reaction later, rather than letting the old code dictate a screaming match.
Okay, so that perfectly sets the stage. We've paused. We've radically accepted our reality to stop the cortisol dump. We've assessed the room to see if it's safe to be vulnerable. Now we're in the garage, ready to work.
Wrenches in hand.
Exactly. So if I'm trying to actually rewrite this code, I imagine I either have to change the logic of the code itself or change the physical output, like what my body is actually doing. Are those the levers we pull?
You've just perfectly described the two main intervention strategies. We have cognitive tools, which target the logic, and we have behavioral tools, which target the physical reality. Let's look at the cognitive lever first.
Okay.
The foundational technique here is reframing. This isn't about changing the facts of a situation. It's about changing the frame through which your brain processes those facts.
Give me an example of how that plays out in real time.
Okay, let's say you just walked out of a high-stakes meeting and it went poorly. The automatic script fires. I completely failed that presentation. I am fundamentally terrible at my job.
A script I think everyone listening has run at least once, myself included.
Absolutely. So the cognitive exchange, the reframe, looks at the exact same objective event, but applies a different logic. The reframe is, I didn't fail. I gathered critical data, I experienced a setback, and because I now know exactly where my argument was weak, I have the information required to be 1% better next time.
So you're creating a logical pivot. You're literally rewiring the categorization system in your brain so the event is filed under growth instead of catastrophe.
Exactly. And for a lot of people, that logic is enough. But that brings us to the second lever, behavioral tools. And the most robust tool here is exposure.
Exposure, like facing the fear.
Right. You don't just sit on your couch and logically reframe your fear of public speaking. You physically step into the arena in tiny, heavily controlled doses. You practice your presentation in front of a mirror. Then you deliver it to one highly trusted friend in a living room where your social risk is effectively zero.
Wow, it sounds exactly like the mechanics of a vaccine.
Because the mechanism is identical. A vaccine introduces a tiny, deactivated, harmless fragment of a virus into your body. It's not enough to make you sick, but it's enough to teach your biological immune system how to recognize and defeat the threat.
So behavioral exposure does the exact same thing for your psychological immune system.
Precisely. You introduce a tiny, manageable dose of the stressor so your brain learns how to process it without hitting the panic button.
I want to dig into the why here because this brings up a really common skepticism. Doesn't the behavioral approach, like just practicing the speech over and over, doesn't it just treat the symptom?
How do you mean?
Well, if I practice until my delivery is smooth, aren't I just learning to wear a better mask? I might look calm, but how does that physical action fix the deep-rooted subconscious belief that I am
being process reality and why both levers exist? We are not all wired with the same dominant processing language.
Okay, so some are logic, some are action.
Exactly. Some people are highly cognitive, logical processors. For them, changing the thought through a logical reframe actually does dismantle the root belief. Logic is their native tongue. If they can build a watertight logical argument that their fear is unfounded, the fear dissolves.
I definitely fall into that camp. If I can outthink the problem and build like a spreadsheet of why I shouldn't be worried, my heart rate actually goes down.
But there is a massive portion of the population that processes the world physically and emotionally. For them, a logical reframe feels like useless intellectualizing.
Just words.
Just words. You tell them you didn't fail, you gathered data, and they'll respond, "That's a nice sentence, but my chest still feels like it's in a vice grip and I feel terrified." Logic cannot penetrate their nervous system.
The code just doesn't compute in that language.
Right. They require the behavioral lever. Their amygdala needs physical proof of safety. They need to experience the action giving the speech to a friend and physically survive it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, when the speech is over and they realize they weren't laughed out of the room, their central nervous system says, "Oh, look at that. We didn't die." That physical realization is what travels down and rewrites their root belief. You really have to respect your dominant learning style to make the exchange stick.
That makes a ton of sense. You have to know if your brain speaks logic or if it speaks action. But any powerful tool can cause serious damage if you don't know how to swing it.
Oh, easily.
So if the cognitive lever is reframing, what stops me from just looking at a terrible situation like getting fired and blindly telling myself it's the best thing that ever happened to me, just slapping a massive smiley face on a disaster?
Well, you've just walked right into the first major trap of exchange, which is toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity.
Yeah. When you try to use the cognitive lever, it is incredibly easy to mistake reframing for delusion. You know, I lost my job, my rent is due, but it's wonderful. The universe has a plan. Good vibes only.
It's just suppressing the genuine negative emotion under a thick layer of forced optimism.
And biologically, that suppression is a disaster. You are invalidating your nervous system's very real, very justified alarm bells. True reframing must be anchored in reality. It incorporates the radical acceptance we discussed earlier.
So what does a healthy reframe look like in that scenario?
A true reframe sounds like, I lost my job, and this is profoundly stressful and terrifying, but I also possess a resilient skill set, and this disruption forces me to finally explore a career pivot I've been avoiding for years.
The nuance there is huge.
Yeah.
It honors the reality of the pain while simultaneously pointing your brain toward a productive, actionable future.
Okay, so trap 1 is toxic positivity. Where else do we go wrong when we start rewriting this code?
Trap 2 is over-identifying with the new you. When you successfully start exchanging your reactions, when you finally conquer an old demon, it is very common to become unhealthily obsessed with your new persona.
Like becoming a fanatic. Exactly. There's a vivid example of this in the literature regarding lifestyle changes. Imagine someone who has battled poor dietary habits and physical lethargy for decades. They finally rewrite the script. They lock in their nutrition, they hit the gym daily, they transform their health.
Which is a monumental victory.
It really is, but suddenly you notice they start looking down on overweight people with visible disgust. They become hyper-judgmental of friends who aren't tracking their macronutrients or waking up at 5 a.m. to run.
Oh man, we've all encountered the newly converted zealot.
Right. What is happening psychologically is the creation of an arrogant shadow persona. They aren't actually judging the people around them. They are aggressively projecting their deep, unresolved fear of their old self onto others.
Oh, wow.
They're terrified of slipping back into their old habits, so they build this fortress of arrogance and judgment to protect this fragile new you.
Wow. So they just swapped out one unproductive behavior, poor health, for an entirely new unproductive behavior, a total lack of empathy and connection.
Exactly. True psychological integration means you can look at someone struggling with the exact thing you conquered, and instead of judgment, you feel profound empathy. Because you keep the memory of your old self alive enough to remember exactly how heavy those chains were.
That is incredibly poignant.
Yeah.
Don't build a fortress out of arrogance. So what's the final trap?
Trap 3 usually occurs when people utilize the behavioral lever. It is leaping into the panic zone. People get highly motivated and think, I'm going to face my fears today. So, a person terrified of public speaking volunteers to give a keynote address to 500 industry professionals with zero preparation.
Which sounds like a one-way ticket to a meltdown.
It is a recipe for clinical trauma. In psychology, we map out experiences into distinct zones. You have the comfort zone, where your nervous system is completely at rest. Then you have the learning or growth zone.
That's the sweet spot.
Right. This is where you feel moderate stress, your heart rate elevates slightly, but you maintain cognitive control. That is where behavioral exposure works. That's the manageable vaccine dose.
And past that is the panic zone. Which, it reminds me of how people approach fitness. It's exactly like walking into a gym for the first time in a decade.
How does that map out for you?
Well, if you haven't lifted a weight in 10 years, you don't walk up to a barbell and try to deadlift 400 pounds on day one.
Definitely not.
That's the panic zone. You won't build muscle. You will literally snap your spine. You start with the empty bar and the growth zone. And this connects to a subtrap, which is impatience. You don't do 3 bicep curls with the empty bar and then run to the locker room mirror expecting to see a massive bulging bicep instantly.
The physical adaptation takes time.
Right. And these automatic mental algorithms we're trying to rewrite, they took decades to compile. Some of this code was installed when we were literally children. You cannot expect to overwrite a 20-year-old psychological reflex with one weekend of cognitive reframing.
That is the perfect analogy. You are literally carving new neural pathways into the physical tissue of your brain. Neuroplasticity is real, but it requires patience, repetition, and consistency.
So to bring all of this together for the listener, what is the ultimate takeaway of exchange?
The journey of exchange represents a fundamental paradigm shift. The goal of this entire ABCDE model is not to eradicate your flaws. It is not to transform you into a hyper-optimized, flawless robot that never experiences anger, anxiety, or doubt.
Which is deeply relieving, because aiming for robotic perfection sounds exhausting.
It's biologically impossible. Exchange is about acknowledging the messy human parts of yourself through radical acceptance. It's about gently, consistently challenging those old scripts using cognitive reframing and behavioral exposure.
Step by step.
And doing so while navigating around the pitfalls of toxic positivity, protective arrogance, and the panic zone.
And embracing the fact that those old versions of ourselves, my obedient child, or the part of you that's afraid to speak, the part that wants to withdraw, they never truly vanish, do they?
No, they don't. And this leads to a really profound concluding thought drawn from Jungian psychology. The pioneering psychologist Carl Jung wrote extensively about the concept of the shadow. Our old, unproductive reactions, the jagged edges of our personalities that we'd rather hide, they never truly die. Through exchange, they simply move out of the driver's seat and into the passenger seat.
They're still in the car, they just don't have their hands on the wheel.
Precisely. Jung argued that every human being possesses the capacity to be equally aggressive, equally terrified, and equally flawed. The defining difference between someone who is wildly reactive and someone who possesses deep emotional maturity is not the absence of dark impulses, it is the awareness of them.
So the ultimate victory of diving deep into your own mind isn't achieving some state of pure, enlightened perfection.
The ultimate victory is choice. When the external trigger happens, you are no longer a hostage to a blind automatic reflex. You feel the familiar surge of adrenaline, you recognize the old code trying to run, and you consciously choose a new reaction. You finally have the admin password.
You own the system instead of the system owning you. Which brings me to a final thought for you to take with you today. We spent this entire time talking about rewriting your internal code. But think about the external algorithms you interact with every single day.
Oh, that's a great point.
Think about your social media feeds, which are literally engineered by supercomputers to trigger your outrage, your envy, or your anxiety just to keep you scrolling. They rely entirely on your automatic reflexes. If you can put in the work in the garage to rewrite your own internal software, you don't just become a calmer person. You suddenly become immune to the external algorithms actively trying to hack your attention.
That is the ultimate superpower in the modern world.
Thank you for joining us on this complex, sometimes challenging, but infinitely rewarding journey into the mechanics of the mind. Keep exploring, keep questioning the code, and we will catch you on the next deep dive. Take care.